Intel's XeSS or Xe supersampling is perhaps one of the more intriguing aspects of Intel's foray into discrete GPUs. The first generation of GPU products will be built around Alchemist for its architecture, and Alchemist is going to feature things like hardware-based ray tracing, mesh shaders, variable rate shading, and pretty much all of the other features that you would expect from a modern GPU. But yeah, XeSS is perhaps most intriguing of all, offering a fairly competitive solution to Nvidia's DLSS with a couple of differences. So DLSS, or Deep Learning Supersampling, like XeSS, is based on a combination of neural networks and temporal upsampling, and it differs from something like AMD's FSR in a number of ways. Keyly, FSR is basically a spatial upsampler. Now, I've discussed FSR and DLSS a number of times on the channel, so I'll leave a couple of links down below. In this video then, we're going to be focusing on Intel's announcements surrounding XeSS and how it differs from Nvidia's DLSS. I've also gotten some key quotes from Intel as well, so we'll be checking those out right after this message from our sponsor. Did you just build a shiny new PC? Then you'll need a genuine copy of Windows 10 so you can personalize the system and of course get rid of that annoying activation watermark. We've partnered with WhoKeys to give you guys great discounts on Windows 10 keys, and of course they could be fully upgraded to Windows 11 too. You can get 30% off using the coupon code RGT during checkout. I've purchased several of these keys in the past using a personal non-RGT affiliated account, and they've worked flawlessly with quick delivery. If you want to pick up a copy of Windows for as little as $15 or a cheap and legit copy of Office, check the links out in the video description below. While the first generation of ARC graphics cards will be decked out with all of the latest graphical features, such as ray tracing, mesh shaders and the like, the performance of the card is also rumoured to be impressive, but really, XeSS technology is arguably perhaps just as anticipated. XeSS then is an upsampling technology relying on a combination of neural networks and temporal upsampling. Rather similar on the surface level anyway to Nvidia's DLSS or Deep Learning Supersampling. There are a few very important announcements that Intel have made, as well as some demos regarding XeSS, and I want to cover them for you guys here, along with some key quotes from Intel themselves, which they provided me for this video. Let's start things out with arguably the most important and basic aspect, and that is that the attention that it's grabbed from games developers. Nvidia's DLSS has already been incorporated in well over 100 games, and its rapid adoption at this stage is, well, thanks to numerous improvements that Nvidia have made, including the ease of implementation into games themselves, such as now it's basically a plugin for Unreal along with other popular game engines. So ease of adoption for games developers, and thus in turn developers actually offering it as an option for gamers, is of course extremely important, and well, one of the more basic aspects of any technology at the end of the day, us being able to use it. To this end then, we've already seen titles such as Death Stranding, which previously embraced DLSS, and now a number of other titles also pledging their support for XeSS as well. This of course isn't a black mark against DLSS. A number of games have already also incorporated DLSS and FSR, such as Back 4 Blood, but it's going to be intriguing what's going to happen to the market over the months when XeSS finally launches. Outside of Death Stranding though, we have Hitman 3, Grit and some other titles as well. Intel has already opened up discussions and testing with developers right now, so essentially if you're working in a studio, you can go ahead and start tinkering with XeSS. In brief then, similar to Nvidia, Intel's tech revolves around machine learning, specifically a neural network. Basically, it's trained to, I suppose the best way of describing it is filling in the blanks for missing pixel details. Considering upsampling from 1080p to 1440p, a resolution of 1920 by 1080 needs to increase to 2560 by 1440. In essence then, the neural network figures out what and how to fill in, quote unquote, those missing details. So details on say rocks, cars and even character models can be preserved. Further to this, because it's temporal, it can actually use previous frames of animation as a means to gather additional data. By using a frame, or several, of animation prior, details can be easily extrapolated. Adding to this, a higher frame rate in particular, there's often very little change between, say, frame A, B and C. Because of this, you can draw a rich history, if you will, of detail. So then yes, XCSS is an intriguing prospect, because it combines many of the positives of Nvidia's DLSS technology, but in some ways actually has a lower hardware requirement. We'll get to that in just a moment. But as many of you know, Nvidia's DLSS really relies on the GeForce RTX's Tensor Core solution for upsampling, so it doesn't have any fallbacks for competitor solutions or also Nvidia's own GeForce 10 or below cards. Now, Nvidia though do have their own solutions for this, including NIS, and I've covered this rather extensively in a recent video. It uses spatial upsampling and it does a fairly good job. It's kind of like FSR for those unfamiliar. I'll try to remember to link it, of course, in the video description. Diving a bit deeper though, Intel's Xe Alchemist, as well as Intel's XeSS technology, is implemented rather differently to what we've seen with Nvidia's DLSS and GeForce RTX solutions. XCSS can run a more generalized code path on competitor hardware, such as say a Radeon GPU. But also tensor cores themselves are not present on Intel's GPU silicon. Instead, the company have forged their own solution. But let's take a few steps back and start with the actual instructions themselves and the architecture. The instructions XeSS uses depends on the card. And more accurately, it depends if it's an Intel Xe HPG, or I suppose you could also call it an Alchemist GPU, or whether it's a competitor card. On an Xe Alchemist GPU, the instructions used are XMX. I'll give you guys a brief overview of the Alchemist GPU architecture though, just so you can get a handle of all of this works. I will be ignoring several very important aspects and elements of the GPU architecture, and instead I'll be focusing pretty much just on the stuff that XCSS revolves around. When Alchemist launches, I'll do a deeper dive because, let's face it, there'll be more publicly available information at that point anyway. So just like any modern day GPU from either AMD or Nvidia, Intel essentially creates their cards from smaller building blocks, and these can be tweaked or modified depending on the purpose of the card. So, for example, if a product is designed for gaming, such as the HPG lineup, ARC, you might see a very different configuration compared to those that are for data center, which would be basically just compute. To this end, Intel has arranged Xe with fundamental building blocks, and those are, well, Xe cores. Inside of the Xe core, there are 16 vector engines and 16 matrix engines. The matrix engines are what are responsible for running Xe matrix extensions, or XMX. That's of course if you're running XeSS, but they are capable of doing other stuff as well, basically machine learning, but again, I'm not going to touch that here. These Xe cores come together then, or more accurately 4 of them, into a larger whole, and this is known as a render slice. Render slices can then come together to form a larger GPU, as you can see in this diagram from Intel. Intel connects the Xe render slices from Alchemist together with a bunch of other stuff inside the core, such as caches and memory controllers. We also see the render slices outfitted with other things such as dedicated RT units too. Again, this is a very brief crash course on the Intel Alchemist architecture. So, now you kind of understand how XMX cores and instructions will kind of work. What exactly is going to happen if you try to run XeSS on a competitor solution? Well, I'm glad you asked. Intel have built a fallback solution. This basically means that if it doesn't detect relevant Intel hardware, it can basically go down a separate code path, and this is DP4A instructions. These are more general instructions, i.e. they're available on more graphics cards, including competitors, and they don't, however, leverage vendor-specific hardware. So, for example, the tensor cores on an RTX card from Nvidia would remain idle. But DP4A also requires a more modern GPU, in essence anyway, compared to AMD's FSR. So if you're running an AMD card, for example, you would be out of luck if you're running Polaris, such as an RX 480 or a 560 or whatever. Also, Vega cards, generally speaking, are not supported. So if you have Vega 64, that's a no-go. Instead, a Vega 20 based GPU is required, Navi 12, and anything RDNA 2 based, such as an RX 6800 XT, you would be good to go. So, what if you own Navi 1? Well, that's kind of weird. It basically depends on the SKU. So, only Navi 12 GPUs actually have DP4A instructions. So if you own an RX 5700 XT, then you can't run this because it's a Navi 10 core. For Nvidia though, cards such as the GTX 1080 Ti or any other Pascal cards such as the very popular 1060s and 1070s, you'll just be fine. Maxwell, such as a GTX 980, these will not run XCSS. But if you're the proud owner of an RTX 30 or RTX 20 card, you will be good to go as well. But crucially, as I mentioned a moment ago, tensor cores will not work here. They will just basically sit dark. They won't function. Intel apparently wishes XeSS to be as open as possible and also encourage the API to work across different vendors. And basically, it's been confirmed that there will be future versions of XeSS, such as 2.0, 3.0, much like Nvidia have done with DLSS. Naturally though, Intel are being pretty cagey into the longer term roadmap, but yeah, it's a pretty good indicator that we'll see impressive things from the company in the longer haul. Getting back to the actual inner workings of things, Intel created a frame graph here as a comparison with several bars. Naturally, we have the 1080p low resolution, quote unquote, image, and it's basically the quickest to render here. Of course, worth noting, the bars here are for illustrative purposes only, and well, it will of course depend on games. And real 1080p to 4K results will likely differ substantially. So for example, if a game's running high-end graphical effects like ray tracing, well, yeah, your mileage will definitely vary. The important part though, according to Intel, is that their own XCSS solution will run faster when running XMX instructions using their own Alchemist GPUs compared to what we have with DP4A. But if you own, say, a 6800 XT, you will still benefit greatly from running XCSS. You can see this quite clearly on this slide here. Notice the purple bit at the end of the grey for DP4A and XMX. The grey represents the time to render a 1080p image, and the bluey purpley bit, for lack of a better way of describing it, the time to upsample. Essentially, you're still going to save a significant amount of frame time running XeSS on a supported Radeon or GeForce card versus rendering a 4K image. What if you own Intel's XeLP microarchitecture? Well, then you would use DP4A2. Like Nvidia's DLSS, Intel uses machine learning to supersample from lower resolution images to a higher quality one. Intel have made some public images available, and yeah, there does seem to be some similarities in terms of the implementation to Nvidia's DLSS tech. Similarly, previous frames of animation are used, for example, for motion of objects, and generally speaking, it should be a better visual quality for both DLSS and XeSS compared to AMD's FSR. Although XeSS is not a driver toggle. I wonder though if in the future this may change, particularly given the work that AMD and Nvidia are doing, I suppose, with their own respective hardware and drivers. So yeah, basically XeSS will need to be implemented in a game or a game engine. The good news is, just like DLSS, say 2.3, the tech behind XeSS is not trained on a per game basis, so it should be fairly easy to incorporate. It'll be interesting though, because Intel want to make this as open as possible. Theoretically, and I stress this is in theory, this is certainly not official and has not been done, I wonder if we're going to see this therefore implemented in various mods, and possibly even emulators. Like for example, we'll see GTA 5 support FSR thanks to community mods. For the record, Intel are also being a little cagey as to the training part of the equation. Nvidia have basically said that their solution uses a 16K ground truth in various deep dives, although of course this can change, and well, yeah, there's a really interesting interview with WCCF Tech, I'll try to remember to link it in the video description, where an Intel employee, Karfnik, basically says that we train with 64 samples per pixel reference image. Now, if you want to draw a resolution, well, you could do the math. 64 would be, 8 samples in X and Y, and you could, that would be 32K, which would be, it would be okay, but I wouldn't call it 32K, because what we are doing is effectively all of those samples are contributing to the same pixels. I think 64 samples are all contributing to the same pixel, but yeah, effectively, 32K pixels is what we use to train, is what we use to create a reference for one image. Currently though, it does seem that the 4K resolution is the limit, but just like I was mentioning a moment ago with, the future roadmap, it's possible that they could actually go to 8K or possibly higher, according to Intel. I also reached out directly to Intel, and Intel has provided me a couple of key quotes as what their goals and motivations are with XCSS. So let's take a look. XeSS or XeSupersampling is a novel upscaling technology that enables high performance and high fidelity visuals. It uses deep learning to synthesize images that are very close to the quality of native high-resolution rendering. It works by reconstructing sub-pixel details from neighboring pixels, as well as motion-compensated previous frames. This reconstruction is performed by a neural network trained to deliver high performance and great image quality, with up to a 2x performance boost. Intel's XeSS technology is based on dedicated AI acceleration hardware, built into the first generation of XeHPG discrete GPUs to deliver high-quality image upscaling, boost frame rates, and improve gaming experiences. We're also enabling XeSS on a broad set of hardware, including that of our competition. We accomplished this using DP4A instructions, which will be available on a wide range of hardware, including Iris Xe integrated and discrete graphics cards. As part of our commitment to pushing the gaming industry forward, as XeSS matures, we want to open up XeSS SDK and tools for everyone to implement. So there you go then. A really quick deep dive into XeSS technology. As you can imagine, when it launches, we'll be investigating it thoroughly and hopefully using Intel's own GPUs too to do so. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to both Bob Duffy and Nicholas over at Intel for their assistance in the video as well as the quotes. For those wondering, I've also got a video on FSR from AMD, and I basically spoke about the implementation and methodology behind FSR, and AMD helped there too and provided tons of quotes. So if you want to check that out, you can look at the description of the video. As of the time that I'm recording this video, XeSS is not available to us as gamers, so it's very difficult to do quality comparisons versus DLSS and see what type of performance impacts we get in real games, because ultimately that's kind of the thing right now. It's going to be very intriguing to see how the dust settles with DLSS, FSR, and of course XeSS in the longer run. But as I've said a trillion times at this point on the channel, competition is only ever a good thing. I'll be very curious to see how the PR direction of Nvidia changes in the future when we see XeSS finally launch. I wonder if they'll open things up further still. Who knows? I'm honestly spitballing here. Obviously, at the end of the day, AMD, Intel, and Nvidia will be all fiercely competing in the GPU space. The good news from the perspective of AMD and Nvidia though is that with the first generation of ARC graphics cards anyway, they should in theory have the performance lead, with the rumours that we've been hearing, and I've been hearing and talking about numerous times at this point on the channel, to say that XE, the first generation, is going to be roughly RTX 3070, possibly a little bit faster. So yeah, Nvidia theoretically, as well as AMD, should retain the performance of leadership. And this should of course be extended still when the next generation of products come out for both. However, I suspect it's not going to be too long before Intel counters with Generation 2 and so on. Basically, it's going to be a fiercely competed battle in gaming, and that's not even to discuss things like the data center, which, let's face it, there's a lot of pennies to be made. I'll be very curious. Intel seems to be at this point getting developers on board, so let's just hope that they offer a compelling solution and that there's going to be a decent amount of stock available. Of course, if I get hold of one of the Xe GPUs, I'll be definitely discussing it with you guys, as well as giving a full breakdown of XCSS. With that said, thank you very much for checking out the video. I will see you soon, and take care of yourselves. Bye for now.